So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages for tomorrow's newspapers. The Guardian leading on the Channel tragedy that saw at least 12 people, including women and children, killed after their boat tore apart. The front of the Mirror shows the 80-year-old grandfather who was killed while walking his dog. The Metro reports on the inquest into a man who died a week after appearing on the Jeremy Kyle show 5 years ago in 2019. The Eye reports on calls for prosecutions for those responsible for the Grenfell fire safety failures ahead of tomorrow's release of the final report by the public inquiry into the tragedy. Angela Rayner in talks to end Thatcher's right to buy policy. That is the lead story for The Telegraph. The Times, which says the US and UK are at odds over arms sales to Israel. The Financial Times reports new regulation to bolster the payouts banks and financial companies have to pay to fraud victims has been scaled back after pressure from business. The surprising Surrey suburb that mafia outlaws are migrating to lay undercover. That's in the Star. It's Woking, if you were wondering, I think. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head straight to Sonia and to Ali. Welcome to both of you. And Ali, why don't you kick off with the Times, these differences and the repercussions after the Starmer government decided to withdraw certain export licences for military equipment to Israel?
Well, this is right. This is David Lammy yesterday making an announcement that 30 out of 350 export licences would be revoked. This is on the grounds of, as we understand it, legal advice that has been given to the government. This is not an arms embargo. This is not a blanket ban. We should put it in context. The previous governments in this country have done similar things. And look, I think the question really is whether this is really legal or not. Now, the government is saying it is. It should publish a legal advice. It'd be much better if we could all see it. The US is saying that it does not believe that there is any legal basis for this whatsoever. Indeed, they're coming out and basically saying, John Kirby, spokesman for the US National Security Council, saying there has been no determination by the United States that they have violated international humanitarian law. Now, what Lammy is saying is that there could be a potential use of these weapons at some point that could breach humanitarian law. It hasn't been breached yet, but it could be. And on that basis, they're not doing it. Now, some people are saying this is all about internal Labour Party management. They know that they were vulnerable during the general election. They lost some seats to pro-Gaza MPs. They've formed their own little group now. And this is about quelling internal unrest within the Labour Party.
Yeah, the difficulty is, of course, America has ironclad guarantees to Israel. They've made that quite clear under Joe Biden. And actually, Daniel Finkelstein on the radio this evening suggesting that if you appoint an Attorney General who is Jewish but against the Netanyahu government, you're going to get a result like this. But are there repercussions? You know, is it just enough to quell the pro-Palestinian feelings amongst Labour MPs and just little enough to thoroughly upset the Israeli government?
Yeah, well, it's a very tricky one, isn't it? Because it is just 30 out of 350. So within the Labour Party, in terms of those internal politics, on the one hand, you've got some MPs and Labour supporters who are saying this is terrible because it sends the wrong signal to Iran. And then on the other hand, you've got other MPs saying on the left of the party, says this just doesn't go anywhere near far enough. This is only a tiny first step in the right direction. So it's sort of, it doesn't, I'm not sure how much it helps that internal Labour politics because you've got two sides who are very, very far apart from each other. Then you bring in the US. And it's really interesting looking at the difference between what the US is saying publicly, what their spokespeople are saying publicly, and then what senior government sources have told the Times about what the US is saying in back channels. So publicly, absolutely, they've said what Ali has said, but they've also sort of been clear. The UK is a sovereign state. It's entitled to make its own assessment. The US will be making its own assessment, and we're not affected by the UK, and our assessment is this, and we will keep that under review. So that's the sort of public, quite polite, you know, the UK can do what it wants, but we've got our own sort of view. But what a government source, so that's one of our government sources, has told the Times, is that the US had privately warned the UK against suspending arms sales because they were worried about two things. First of all, I think the message it sends to Iran, and secondly, concerns that it might interfere with these attempts to broker a ceasefire. And, you know, there was a feeling that we might have got quite close last week and it didn't happen. And the longer it goes on, the more lives are lost in Gaza and the more hostages. You know, we had that awful story about hostages losing their lives, being murdered by Hamas. So, there are people who are trying to make the ceasefire happen, and certainly, if we're to believe the briefing, the US thinks that it could undermine that because it could give succor to Iran and therefore Hamas. Yeah. So it's genuinely really difficult because I think there have been clear signals from both the UK and the US that they think Israel has gone too far, isn't doing enough in terms of international aid. The UK clearly feels that actually a stronger signal does need to be sent that is in line with international law. There now may be a difference of opinion with the US. But I'm not sure where this leaves any of us in terms of the actual conflict.
Yes, and the delicacy of timings like this, certainly on the day, funerals for those hostages you mentioned, or some of them were taking place. Let's go to The Guardian now. Pressure elsewhere for Sir Keir Starmer, this on winter fuel payments for pensioners. Question, was he going to face a challenge in the Commons? What's the answer from this article?
Well, he may face a challenge in the coming days because there's going to be a vote on this legislation coming up. And this is a bit of a headache for Keir Starmer because for two reasons. One, it was not mentioned in the Labour manifesto. This was not talked about at all. And secondly, a lot of people are thinking, hang on a second, I thought we voted for a Labour government here. Well, I would use we in a broad sense here. So people feel a bit let down by this. So Labour is meant to be on the side of the people who are vulnerable. Yes, there are 11 million pensioners who'll be affected by this. This will raise about 1.5 billion. And there are 1 million pensioners, apparently, that should be signing up to means-tested benefits who are not on that yet. So, yes, they should be doing it.
And if they did, you'd lose money at the end of this.
You would lose money, but the government's trying to encourage them to do it. But still, it does seem where Rachel Reeves is rolling the pitch for this big October the 30th announcement, this big budget that's going to come out, that they want to target pensioners. I mean, some people would say, well, look, the pain's got to be spread around somewhere. And intergenerational inequality-wise, take a little bit from pensioners to try and give it to younger people below 50.
And the point about the manifesto, it had been mentioned in other manifestos, just not this election. So had they planned this all along? It's a kind of trust issue at this point, isn't it, I suppose?
It's a very tricky one, again, because there is no question that tough financial decisions have to be taken. And Rachel Reeves' argument is, hang on a second, we got into government and there's £22 billion of unfunded spending commitments that we didn't know about, a £22 billion gap in the budget.
But were they hasty specifically on this policy, in your view? Were they hasty to make this decision?
Well, I think they should have done it in a different way. So, personally, from a substantive perspective, winter fuel payment goes to all pensioners. There are some very wealthy pensioners who don't need it. The problem is when you cut it off at the only pensioners who will get it now will be pensioners in receipt of means-tested pensions credit. There are some who should be getting it and don't claim it and will therefore lose this money who really need it. And then there are some pensioners just above the line. And that's tricky. So if I were the government, I think it is a fair place to look to save money in very difficult times. And there have been nasty surprises for the Chancellor. But I think it shouldn't have been withdrawn so harshly, or it shouldn't be withdrawn so harshly going forward. And I think it could, there's no question there's a lot of Labour MPs who are getting pressure from their constituents on this. The thing is that Starmer set a precedent before the summer when he suspended Labour MPs who voted against the government on basically wanting the two-child benefit cap to be lifted. Those MPs got suspended. If they abstained, they were fine. If they voted against the government, they were suspended. So I suspect that might quash the rebellion this time, because people will look at that and think, well, if we vote against the government on this, we might be out, of the sort of parliamentary Labour Party, at least on a temporary basis. So I suspect that the rebellion won't be as big as it would have otherwise have been.
Yeah. In the meantime, the overtures to Europe, if that's the way to describe it, what to do about youth mobility, and, for example, for bands touring Europe. The Financial Times suggesting that his shout-out... Oh, that's the wrong one, is it? I think I'm on the FT. Oh, there we go. I think I've jumped a story. My fault. I'll go back to that one. Yes, it's falling on deaf ears is the point this article is trying to make.
Yeah, look, Keir Starmer's trying to make overtures to the EU. He wants a better relationship with them on many, many grounds. One of them is to allow bands to tour. He also wants younger people to actually be able to enjoy the freedoms in the EU as well, and also wants fewer checks at the borders. None of these things at the moment the EU is playing ball on at all. Now, this is all a bit sad because there was a bit of a love-in with, was it Olaf Scholz the other day, I think he spoke to?
Yeah.
There was a bit of a love-in there.
And Macron.
But nothing's really coming of this yet. But it is early days.
But see, the issue is the EU wants to give us some. They either want to have a substantive deal with us, something like, you know, reforming a customs union. They don't want to be doing these little bits of cherry picking. It's not worth it. There's actually something big they want, which is a youth mobility scheme. Will Labour do that? You know, it's problematic for Labour because they've got to deliver growth. Closer ties with the EU would be one way to do it, but these little teeny bits and pieces, they're not going to get us there, and the EU would want something more substantive.
Yeah. The story I jumped, I think I'll do after the break.
OK.
That's another one.
That's because we've talked too long, I imagine.
It's not. It's because I jumped it. Anyway, still to come on the press preview, The Guardian leading on the Channel tragedy, which saw at least 12 people, including children, killed after their boat tore apart.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Sonia Soda and Ali Miraj. Welcome back to both of you. Sonia, The Guardian, the latest tragedy in the Channel. 6 children, your paper saying, or your sister paper saying, among the 12 dead on what seems a very overcrowded boat that literally ripped apart.
Yeah, it's just awful. So there were 70 passengers on this boat. We know at least 12 people have died. 6 of them were children, including a pregnant woman. 10 of them were female. And that makes it the second worst tragedy in the Channel since the small boats crisis started. So it's a really dreadful reminder that, you know, we've had an election here in the UK, but there are still these traffickers operating boats off Calais, people paying, you know, a lot of money, their last sort of cent to, you know, to these people to get them to cross the ocean, and the Channel rather, and they are on incredibly dangerous vessels. Often it's no more than a dinghy, overcrowded. Just 7 or 8 of the people on the boat, the passengers, were wearing life jackets out of 70. It's mortal peril. But these people are so desperate to get to the UK to claim asylum, and you know most of the people on this boat were from Eritrea. Eritrea's got sort of a terrible they're fleeing conflict, terrible human rights abuses, and you know they're crossing and so it's a reminder that Labour has scrapped the Rwanda scheme, I think quite rightly, because there are a lot of people who think that it had no chance of working as a deterrent and it put us in conflict with international law. But there is still this issue of the small boats, and quite frankly, no one really knows what to do about it. If they tell you they do, they're lying. We've seen, in the same with the Mediterranean, nothing really has worked in stopping people crossing the Mediterranean.
Well, we know from Yvette Cooper that those who were working on the Rwanda scheme have been transferred to clearing the asylum backlog.
Yes.
In terms of this and this issue that this criminal enterprise is making it even more overcrowded, 51 people from the boat were saved, according to rescuers. 2 are in a critical condition. Fewer than 8 people were wearing life jackets. And the PA News Agency has analysed Home Office figures, suggesting that actually the boats are indeed becoming more overcrowded. So they've extrapolated the number of boats with the numbers who have been on them, and found that now they're packing an average of 52 on each craft. In 2022, that was 41, that figure. So, sending people to their deaths.
It's an awful business model, and this is the summer months, so you see the crossings go up in the summer, and it's absolutely appalling. Look, hearts goes out to people who actually are, perishing, putting their lives at risk, paying unscrupulous people smugglers the best part of 7 to 12 grand a pop for the pleasure of putting their lives at risk, and sadly perishing in this way. Sonia says there's no evidence for the Rwanda scheme. Look, there may not be, but what we do know is there have been some limited interviews that were done before the scheme was scrapped, and people were saying, if it's scrapped, we'll wait for Labour to come to office. And they're like now rubbing their hands with glee. I mean, look, none of this is easy. This is a big
and
global
Labour will
problem.
find out how hard it is.
Well, it is very hard. And I understand that Labour wants to put this new border force in place and bring MI5 people together with the police and border force and all the rest of it. Nothing has worked. The thing is, we don't know if the Rwanda scheme would have been the deterrent. I mean, it was never tried. It was very expensive. It was never tried.
20 seconds on our last story, the one I jumped. Angela Rayner in talks to end Thatcher's right to buy. Very quickly.
About time from my perspective. This is basically a scheme that gives people a big discount when they buy their home. It costs government a lot of money, and there's big questions about should that subsidy be concentrated on people in council housing who want to get just over the line, when there's so many people who are trapped outside of the housing market. And actually, I think it would be better invested in affordable homes to rent for young people and low-income people.
OK, we can discuss that more, no doubt. Sonia, Ali, lovely to see you both. Thank you. Here's the weather. So unsettled this week, widespread showers, more general heavy rain in parts of the south on Thursday and Friday. There'll be a mostly fine start tomorrow, though. It'll be chilly in the north. Showers mainly around the Irish Sea and over northern parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Northern Scotland will stay mostly dry and sunny through the morning, but showers will develop widely elsewhere, locally heavy. Cool for most of us. Temperatures will be nearer average in the southeast, though. Northeastern Britain will see low cloud and patchy drizzle drizzle spreading onto the coast during the afternoon. Elsewhere, showers will become increasingly confined to Irish Sea coastal counties and eastern England, leaving most other places fine into the evening. Showers in the southeast look like becoming heavy, thundery and prolonged later. Thursday, heavy, potentially thundery rain again to the south. Well, our press preview continues in the 11 o'clock. More on the deaths of a dozen people after their boat was ripped open.